We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Monday edition. Sorry, I've had a turgid morning, as they say. Welcome to the Monday edition of Free Association Radio. This is Robert Phoenix, and this is the Monday mashup. So I had a little bit of this whole Pisces thing right now. It's out of control. It's totally out of control. We're going to have, I think in a few days, I think it's like by Thursday, we're going to have 7 planets in Pisces. When the new moon hits, we're going to have the Sun, new moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Neptune, Chiron, all in Pisces. My God. Can we pile on one more planet? Is there another planet out there that we could classify and throw it in the mix? Incredible. I was talking with a friend last night, and we were trying to figure out when the last time there was such a big stellium like this that occurred. And the one time that really jumps out is February of 1962, February 4th and 5th of 1962, where there were 7 planets in Aquarius. And at the same time, there was a solar eclipse and a new moon. I always thought that if the Antichrist was going to be born, it would be born on the 5th of February 1962. Because of all the Aquarius and the solar eclipse, which would make the Antichrist 51. Wonder who's 51. Yeah. Catch my drift. So anyway, yeah, all this Pisces is just out of control. And I got up, relatively early today and decided to, be productive. And when I get up in the morning, there's a song in my head generally, and the songs are like, they're like kind of like the theme for the day. And the song that I had was "Stand" by Sly and the Family Stone. Sly Stone and Pisces, of course, March 15th. So it's like, yeah, today I'm going to make a stand. I'm going to get up and I'm going to do the right thing over and over and over again. Whether it's laundry or my radio show, today will be an effort of faith. This is what I will do today. I will make a stand in my life. stand up for what I know and believe in, and also stand up for my livelihood because it's important here. So with that in mind, I dutifully got online and I booked my show. I started doing some laundry. My kid has a game tonight, so I've got to get his uniform nice and clean. Put the laundry in the washing machine. And I realized I only had 4 quarters. I do my laundry at a pay washing machine downstairs from my apartment, not very far, maybe 50 feet. It's not that inconvenient at all. So I realized I need some more quarters. So I say to myself, self, I'm going to go down and get some quarters. I'm going to have a breakfast at my favorite diner, mediocre American food breakfast place called Jim's. 2 eggs, hash browns, bacon. That'll just make my world bright. It's the comfort food country breakfast. Get in my car, start my car, go about 40 feet, and guess what? I run out of gas, which is a rarity. I hardly ever run out of gas. But my dash is a little screwy. So I got about 40 feet from my apartment. I ran out of gas. And I was going to call AAA, but guess what? I noticed I didn't have a AAA card. I mean, I have one, but I couldn't find it. So I said to myself, self, why don't you go out there, go get yourself a gas can. And that way you'll have a gas can and get some gas. There's a gas station not far from my house. Again, all this Pisces, fuel, gas, you know what I'm saying? So I walked, and I got to the gas station, not very far, and I looked at the gas can, and they wanted $10 for a small little red gas can. And I said, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to give them $10 of my hard-earned money for a chintzy little red gas can. And it was one of these very interesting moments. Again, staying with the Pisces theme, I overheard these 2 guys talking about beer. And this was not anything that was premeditated on my part, mind you. But one guy was talking to the other guy who was, I think, a beer salesman or a soda salesman, one of these guys. And the non-soda beer, liquid, Piscean fluid salesman guy, he says, hey, you know, there's no more American beer. And he's right, by the way. Budweiser, Coors, and I believe Miller they're all owned by foreign corporations. Budweiser, which was owned by the August Bush family. These were all German families that came to California, United States. Bush, the Bush family, the Coors family in Colorado, the Bush family in Missouri, and I believe the Joseph Pabst family in Wisconsin. I think Pabst is still American. It was the Miller Company. I don't know who produced Miller beer. Anyway, they're all foreign beers now. Coors is owned by Labatt's, Canadian. Budweiser is owned by the people that brew Amstel Light. So anyway, I just reinforced what he was saying about there being no American beers. And as I'm walking out the gas station, I say to myself, I wonder if this guy could give me a lift down to the other part of the road, and I can get a legit gas can. And I asked him, I said, are you going down to the 290 Y71? And he looked at me and sized me up. I said, yeah. Looked at his watch, checked his watch, looked at me, he said, yeah. I said, hey, I'm trying to get a real legit gas can. Is there any way you could just drop me off down at the intersection down there? I got to go to the auto parts place. And he said, yes. So I got in his truck. He drove me about a mile. Took off a mile of my walking time. And the auto parts place is right next to my favorite American mediocre diner food, Jim's. Popped in there for my breakfast, which I wanted anyway. And then I went and I got my gas can. Now, this is a very clear distinction. I had to have a diesel gas can because I have a diesel car, which meant that I couldn't have used that little chintzy red gas can at the mini mart anyway. So I threw down for a big yellow OSHA-approved diesel gas can, walked back, got diesel in my car, and with 5 minutes left to spare, here I am, ready to do a show about Christianity, faith, Jesus, and where it all went and where it all might be going as we approach Easter here in 2013. 2013, we might actually be witnessing, if not the real, at least the symbolic death of God in this world. That, by the way, takes place or has taken place with the abdication of the papal see by Pope Benedict, who is no longer Pope. He's stepped down. We are without a Pope, ladies and gentlemen. We are popeless, Pope-free. And of course, there was talk about the Malachi prophecy where the final Pope, Petrus Romanus, steps into the breach. Malachi, of course, being the 12th century monk, Irish monk. And everything that he's talked about so far has come pretty close to being true. So I talked about this actually on the show on Friday with Ian Crane. We mentioned Peter Turcos from Ghana. It would be probably too literal to have him as the last pope or the black pope, just because he's black. It's probably too literal, and maybe because his name is Peter. So it would be somebody who might take the name of Peter. We'll see. It's going to be interesting. The conclave. When will the conclave begin? Well, here we are, 7 planets, very mystical number, that 7, coming up, all in the sign of Pisces, which represents Jesus, the fish, in the Piscean age. But then after this, we're moving on. We're going to Aries. So is this the last rush of Pisces before we enter into something much more, well, strident and Roman? How about war? Perhaps. I was looking at the charts of Benedict last night. I was on Kair's show, Cosmophysics, with Kair and Ra, Cosmo Chris, and Teresa Reed, the tarot lady. Maybe I should be the astrology dude. The astrology dude. Tarot lady, meet astrology dude. And I wonder if there could be like a rune ombre or something like that. I don't know. Anyway, I was on the show and I talked about the chart of the Pope. He is an Aries, but he's a Pisces rising. So all of the planets that were stacking up in Pisces and in Aquarius, particularly, were in his 12th house. So this storm of Aquarius and Pisces was coming through his 12th house and into his first house. And the big mover and shaker in his chart is Uranus. Uranus, he has Uranus in Aries. He was born during Uranus in Aries. So he was born the last time Uranus was in Aries. This was the run-up to the Third Reich. And this is when we had all the great technological development in the 20th century. Was from 1927 to 1935. I've talked about it before. Everything pretty much that we experience now with ease was pioneered and developed then. It was discovered then. Television, radio, the computer, complex plastics, radioactivity, jet engines. It all happens during that 7-year period. So that's when he was born. Anyway, we're going to have Mars coming up here in Aries in the not too distant future. Mars is at 22 degrees Pisces. And in his chart, he has Uranus square Mars in his chart, which is interesting. We'll talk about that. But he's going to have Mars conjunct Uranus square his natal Mars. This could be potentially a very, very challenging period for him. And if there were ever a combination of planets that would represent violence and sudden violence, it would be the Mars-Uranus conjunction square. So keep your eye on this Pope in the next 30 days because there's a lot of red energy over the ascendant in the first house of his chart. Now, one of the things that I wanted to talk about today, especially in relation to this Pope, is that the reason why he rose to fame and acclaim within the Catholic Church was that back in 1965 and 1966, it's an incredibly pivotal time in the history of this country and in the world. I've already talked about that quite a bit with Saturn and Aquarius and the implementation of the false Aquarian age, or the shadow Aquarian. And one of the things, there are two things that are sort of synonymous, and they kind of happen simultaneously. One is Vatican II. And Vatican II is an incredibly important historical event within the Catholic Church. Vatican II is when the church elders, the Pope and the bishops and the cardinals, went in and basically reformed the Catholic Church. There were two things that came out of Vatican II that were very important. Now, there were a lot of small, minor details about interpretation and of the Bible and certain tracts, but the main thing that came out of Vatican II was that the Mass was changed from Latin to English. This is very important because once you change the language on something, you change the entire structure of the ritual operation. This is a very important thing to understand. When the Mass was in Latin, there was a magical quality woven into those words. If you listen to the Latin Mass, it is almost the music of a trance, the vocal music of a trance. And then when you change it to English, you're changing it literally from Latin, Italianate to Germanic. And the reason why the church did this was because at that time it was losing people. It was the 60s, and the Catholic Church was losing members of its church to less orthodox faith. So whether it was the Episcopalians or the Presbyterians, they wanted to have Sunday Mass with an acoustic guitar, right? I mean, that's kind of, it was like, hey, let's bring on Joan Baez. And that was one of the main things that came out of Vatican II, was the language change in the Mass. So we went from something that was ancient, really, to something that was much more modern. In English, if you don't know it yet, English is the language of business and economies, not Latin. Latin is the language of incantation. So there was a major sea change and tidal shift within the Catholic Church. As a result of that, there was a faction within the church that was much more hardcore and conservative, and almost became like a shadow group within the church to try to maintain the ironclad will of the church. Because a lot of people think that the Catholic Church had been compromised at that point, that it had been essentially flooded with agents provocateurs from outside the faith. They had actually made their way into the church. They'd moved their way up into positions of power and then actually changed the religious genome of the church itself. Some people believe that these were Illuminists. Some people believe they were Luciferic Satanists. Some people believe that they were Zionists, which actually changed the fulcrum of the religion itself. Now, there could be a case made for that, but what happened was that within the church, as a reaction to the liberalization and the progressive movement of the Catholic Church, there became a much more hardcore faction, and Pope Benedict was part of that hardcore faction. And out of that, you have Opus Dei and the wing of the Catholic Church, which was against liberation theology, which was liberation theology is a whole other kettle of fish. Same with the Piscean metaphor. Liberation theology was a blend of Catholicism that was being practiced in South America and in Mexico, which was not just a mystical, faith-based experience, but it was also political. So they were trying to free people from their political yoke as well as their spiritual burden. And it was fairly popular for a while, but then you had the hardcore version of the Catholic Church, aka Opus Dei, which shut down liberation theology, had some of the church fathers related to liberation theology killed. And it's not really that important anymore. It's not that big. The fascists of the church won the day. So instead of actually being able to hold on to the Orthodox liturgy and the quote-unquote mystical tradition of the church, what they in turn did is they became kind of a fifth column, radically conservative unit that was incredibly reactionary and kept people more in the dark than ever before. And this is where Pope Benedict, this is what he comes out of. He comes out of that reaction towards the liberalism and the progressivism of the church. Now, at the same time as Vatican II, some interesting things happen. There's a book that is published in 1965, and it's published. The author of the book is Hugh Schoenfeld, and the name of the book is called The Passover Plot. And this is interesting. This gets into the sort of internecine genre provocatorianism that I was mentioning about who did what to the church. So Schoenfeld had published a translation of the New Testament with a Jewish perspective, and he was a British biblical scholar. And the Passover plot, these are the bullet points from the Passover plot. And this is how it sets the stage for what's to come for the rest of the 60s. It says here, based on scholarly research into the social and religious culture in which Jesus was born, lived, and died, into the source documents of the Gospels, and into other literature, Schoenfeld reached the following conclusions: that Jesus was a deeply religious Jewish man, probably well-versed in the teachings of the local northern sects, such as the Nazarenes and the Essenes. Yes, I would agree with that. Jesus was an Essene. That growing up in biblical Galilee, he had a skeptical and somewhat rebellious relationship to the hierarchy and teachings mandated by the authorities, the Pharisees of the temple in Jerusalem. That Jewish messianic expectation was extremely high in those times, matched to the despair caused by the Roman occupation of the land and by the subjugation of the Jews. That he was in many ways both typical of his times and yet extraordinary in his religious convictions and beliefs, in his scholarship of the biblical literature, and in the fervency in which he lived his religion out in his daily life. That he was convinced of his role as the expected Messiah. So this is what Ian was talking about on Friday, based on the authority of his having been descendant from King David, the royal bloodline of David, and that he consciously, methodically, to the point of being calculating, attempted to fulfill that role, being eminently well-versed in the details of what that role entailed. That he was convinced of the importance of fulfilling the role perfectly after all prophecy and expectation, that he could not allow himself to fail, as that would undoubtedly lead to his being declared a false Messiah. That he was perfectly aware of the consequences of his actions all along the way, and that he directed his closest supporters, the original 12 apostles, unknowingly to aid him in his plan. So essentially what Schoenfeld is saying is that Jesus was quite aware, quite conscious, and quite manipulative of his role in prophecy during the times. That he involved the least possible number of supporters in his plans, a need-to-know basis. Therefore, very few knew the details of his final plan, and even only the least amount of information was necessary. The culmination of his plan was to be his death, the crucifixion, his resurrection, and his reign as the true kingly priestly Messiah, not in heaven but on earth, the realized king of the Jews. So, according to Schoenfeld's analysis, the events of the Passover, which are presented in all the Gospels, but inconsistently, are most accurately presented in the Gospel of John. His reading of that Gospel convinced him that John's account, though probably filtered through an assistant in transcription in John's old age, suggests that Jesus had planned everything, among other things, so that he would not be on the cross for more than a few hours before the Sabbath arrived, and when it was required by law that Jews be taken down, so that one of his supporters who was on hand would give him water to quench his thirst, that was actually laced with a drug to make him unconscious so that Joseph of Arimathea, a well-connected supporter, would collect him off the cross while still alive, but appearing dead so that he could be secretly nursed back to health. Schoenfeld suggests that the plan went awry because of a soldier's actions with a spear. Longinus. Schoenfeld gives evidence of a high-ranking member of the Sanhedrin who was one of Jesus' followers, likely the beloved disciple, who is otherwise obscure, and notes several instances in which knowledge of or access to the temple was available to one or more of Jesus' followers. He identifies his follower as John, the source of the gospel, many decades later whilst living in Asia Minor. He suggests that this apostle and Joseph of Arimathea were responsible for events following the crucifixion, and that it might have been this apostle, an undercover disciple, as it were, who was seen by those who did not know him at the tomb on the morning of the resurrection. So essentially, what Schoenfeld says here is that Jesus planned everything, including the resurrection, which was essentially taking him away from the tomb. Was taking him away from the tomb. They literally faked the resurrection. This is what Schoenfeld's book has to say. It's 1965, okay? Keep that in mind, 1965. So what's happened in 1965? You have the Passover plot, you have Vatican II. In the United States, there is a flood of movements underway. There's feminism, there's the civil rights movement, there's the anti-war movement, and now you throw the Passover plot into the mix, which creates a stir. But more importantly, it takes on a particular resonance and meaning for a very important man at that time, a man whose every word in quotes were rapidly translated and at times turned into headlines because of his visibility and his controversial stance on things. And the man I'm talking about, ironically, is also named John, and that's John Lennon. And John Lennon had read the Passover plot. This was informing his thinking at that time. And Lennon, of course, said that the Beatles were more popular than Jesus. This happened in 1966, and the quote was on in the magazine Datebook, which is an American teen magazine. And that sets the stage for everything at that time. You have a Beatle who is essentially saying, hey, look, based on popularity, we're more popular than Jesus. And, you know, in some ways, Lennon was right. They were more popular than Jesus. But it also has this resonance with everything else that's going on, which in a lot of ways is the first intimations of the death of God in the Piscean age and the revolution of the Aquarian age, which really takes place on 11/22/1963 at Dealey Plaza. Well, there's another event for the Aquarian age also, and that's the bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But that's a different discussion. So here we are now. Fast forward, the Pope has stepped down, and we are left with a spiritual vacuum, a spiritual void, and potentially one more Pope. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a little bit of music here, give you a few moments to digest that. And when I come back, we'll get into the second half and the final 30 minutes of the show. You're listening to the Monday Mashup. I'm Robert Phoenix, and we're going to explore where Christianity and faith might actually be taking all of us or not from here on out. That was my good friend, the dearly departed Jorge Reyes with El Sendero. And I have a lot of fond memories of Jorge, incredibly fond memories, and an amazing musician, and a person who practiced a unique form of mysticism through sound. So what I wanted to do with the last remaining minutes, or 26 minutes, is I just wanted to look at a couple of pieces of prophecy. And the reason why all of this came up for me, just to let you know, is that yesterday I woke up and I turned on the TV and I went to Turner Classics Movies. And I need to hold on a second. I need to close the studio door here. It's annoying. They're doing some construction in the world headquarters of Free Association Radio. Big things are happening. So I woke up yesterday morning and I turned on Turner Classics Movies, and the first thing I saw was The Greatest Story Ever Told, and absolutely interesting. The part that I tuned into was the judgment of Jesus by Pontius Pilate. And if you're not familiar with the movie, it's I think it's from the early 60s, and it has an all-star cast, a big all-star cast. And Jesus is played by Max von Sydow, who, interestingly enough, also just before then played a man utterly without faith in The Seventh Seal by Ingmar Bergman. So in one being, you had the exemplar of faith and the man of complete and utter lack of faith. And Pontius Pilate was played by Telly Savalas, who was great, by the way. He made a great Pontius Pilate. So I saw the tribunal and the judgment handed down, the freeing of Barabbas, which is interesting because the big Easter event in terms of cinematic productions is the movie Barabbas, starring Billy Zane. If you're not familiar with Barabbas, he's the murderer that is pardoned instead of Jesus. So I think it's interesting that our Easter entertainment is going to be about Barabbas and not Jesus. Anyway, so the punishment is handed down, and I saw him haul the cross. And I said, I got to change the channel. I can't deal with the crucifixion today. So I changed the channel, and then I started to watch Right to the next channel was Kingdom of Heaven, the Ridley Scott film starring Orlando Bloom, and it's about the Knights Templar in Jerusalem. I couldn't get away from it. The past lives were just piling on. But the thing that really got me as I turned back finally to The Greatest Story Ever Told was that at the end, there's a very interesting moment where from the Bible, Jesus talks about faith. And don't worry about tomorrow. You've got enough on your plate for today. Have faith that I will be there for you. So I had to ask myself, well, where am I with this whole faith experience? How are we living exemplars of faith and having faith in something greater than ourselves to absolutely understand what we need and how we need to get there and how we surrender to it? So this is kind of a dialogue and a process that I'm just sharing with you. And it kind of continued throughout the day. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to just read you the prophecy of the popes, and then I wanted to read you a little Edgar Cayce, who's a Pisces and a great American mystic, by the way. It's deeply influenced by Cayce at one point in my life. So this is, let's see if I can find the Malachi prophecy here. So this is the prophecy of the popes. And it was a series of 112 short cryptic phrases in Latin which purport to predict the Roman Catholic popes, along with a few anti-popes, beginning with Pope Celestine II. The alleged prophecies were first published by Benedictine monk Arnold de Wéon in 1595. Guyon attributes the prophecies to St. Malachy, a 12th century Archbishop of Armagh, Ireland. Given the very accurate description of popes up to 1590 and lack of accuracy after that year, Catholic historians generally conclude that the alleged prophecies are a fabrication, written shortly before they were published. The Roman Catholic Church also dismisses them as forgery. The prophecies may have been created in an attempt to suggest that Cardinal Girolamo Simoncelli's bid for the papacy in the Second Conclave of 1590 was divinely ordained. Proponents of the prophecies claim that Pope Benedict XVI corresponded to the Pope described in the penultimate prophecy. The list ends with the Pope identified as Peter the Roman, whose pontificate will allegedly bring destruction of the city of Rome and usher in the beginning of the apocalypse. The alleged prophecies were first published in 1595 by Benedictine Arnold de Guyon in his Lignum Vitae, a history of the Benedictine order. Guyon attributed the prophecies to St. Malachy, 12th century Archbishop of Armagh. According to an account put forward in 1871 by Abbe Cucherat, Malachy was summoned to Rome in 1139 by Pope Innocent II. Do we remember who Pope Innocent II was? Yes, we do. Pope Innocent II was the guy that ordered the siege on the Albigensians in the south of France, slaughtering the Cathars and the Knights Templars. While in Rome, Malachy purportedly experienced a vision of future popes, where he recorded as a sequence of cryptic phrases. This manuscript was then deposited in the Vatican secret archives and forgotten about until its rediscovery in 1590, supposedly just in time for a papal conclave ongoing at the time. Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, a contemporary biographer of Malachy, who recorded the saint's alleged miracles, makes no mention of the prophecies, nor are they mentioned in any record prior to their 1595 publication. I think it's really fascinating. I mean, if you go back to Christianity at that time, it was almost a New Age religion. It was a magical religion. Are you kidding me? I mean, in some ways, who wouldn't be a Christian? I mean, you're endowed with this incredible power, miracles, everlasting life, holy blood. It's an amazing story, especially when it's new. I mean, sign me up for that, man. That sounds like a good thing. Especially since everything else at that time is so incredibly oppressive, right? Why not? Several historians have concluded that the prophecies are late 16th century forgery. Spanish monk and scholar Benito Geronimo Felijo in Montenegro wrote in his Teatro Critico Universal in 1724-1739 in an entry called Purported Prophecies, the high level of accuracy of the alleged prophecies up until the date they were published compared with their high level of inaccuracy after the date is evidence that they were created around the time of this publication. The prophecies and explanation given in Guyon correspond very closely to a 1557 History of the Popes by Onofrio Panavino, including replication of errors made by Panavino, which may indicate that the prophecies were written based on that source. One theory to explain the creation of the prophecies put forward by the 17th century priest and encyclopedist Luis Moreri, among others, is that they were spread by supporters of Cardinal Girolamo Simoncelli in support of his bid to become Pope during 1590 conclave to replace Urban VII. In the prophecies, the Pope following Urban VII is given the description ex antiquite urbis, meaning from the old city. Simoncelli was from Orvieto, which in Latin is Ubervitanum, an old city. The prophecies may therefore have been created in an attempt to demonstrate that Simoncelli was destined to be the Pope. Simoncelli was not elected Pope. Urban VII was succeeded by Pope Gregory XIV. So let's fast forward here. Petrus Romanus, and then we'll do Lord Edgar Casey. In recent times, some interpreters of prophetic literature have drawn attention to the prophecies due to their imminent conclusion. If the list of descriptions is matched on a one-to-one basis to the list of historic popes, since the prophecy's publication, Benedict XVI would correspond to the second to last of the papal descriptions, Gloria Ordivae, or the glory of the olive. The last prophecy predicts the apocalypse. The longest and final motto reads, In persecution extrema SRE sedebit, Petrus Romanus qui pacet ovis in motis, tribulationibus quibus transactisivitus septicoris Diretur and Judex Trinitas Judicabat Populum Suum Vini. This may be translated into English as in the final persecution of the Holy Roman Church, there will sit, i.e. as a bishop, Peter the Roman, who will pasture his sheep in many tribulations. And when these things are finished, the city of 7 hills, i.e. Rome, will be destroyed, and the dreadful judge will judge his people. The end. Several historians and interpreters of the prophecies note that they leave open the possibility of unlisted popes between the glory of the olive and the final pope, Peter the Roman. In the Lignum Vitae, the line in the Persecution Extrema SRE Sedibit forms a separate sentence and a paragraph of its own. While often read as part of the Peter the Roman prophecy, other interpreters view it as a separate, incomplete sentence. So essentially what we're looking at here is something that is kind of on the edge of being prophetic and perhaps even a marketing tract that was set up for a previous pope or a bishop that wanted to become pope, a.k.a. the Cardinal Girolamo Simoncelli. Now I wanted to see what Edgar Casey has to say about all this. And these are just a few things. Edgar Casey, the Sleeping Prophet. This is from the ARE site. And Casey talks about the return of Jesus, or the second coming. For the shape of the world to come, this is what Casey has to say. This is kind of interesting. Decades before the rest of the world was thinking about the enormous impact that China would have upon the global stage, Edgar Casey predicted great things for China and its people. On one occasion, Casey told a group of people that eventually China would become the cradle of Christianity, as applied in the lives of men. That's an interesting quote, suggesting that the personal application of spiritual principles would become paramount to the Chinese people. Casey then went on to caution it would take a long time to manifest, but that it was the country's destiny. Yea, it is far off as man counts time, but only a day in the heart of God. For tomorrow China will awake. This was his quote. That's really interesting. So Casey sees the godless people of this planet becoming the most Christian-centric, and perhaps the most Christian-centric people on this planet becoming the most godless people, i.e. the people of the United States. On another occasion, when a 36-year-old book publisher asked about the destiny of China in 1943, just prior to his own trip to the country to serve in the capacity of a missionary, Casey promised amazing changes in the country that would lead to more democracy and greatest religious freedom. He also suggested that eventually the height of civilization would move west to the Chinese people, and these will progress, for civilization moves west. And this is what Casey had to say about the second coming. It says here, the Casey readings had much to say about the life of Jesus, covering the lost years that were never addressed in the Bible, but Casey also spoke of Jesus' return. Here's an excerpt on the final subject, or on that subject. What is meant by the day of the Lord is near at hand, that as has been promised through the prophets and the sages of old. The time and half-time has been and is being fulfilled in this day and generation, and that soon there will again appear in the earth that one through whom many will be called to meet, those that are preparing the way for his day in the earth. The Lord then will come, even as ye have seen him go. It's funny, he uses the phrase in the earth and not on the earth, and it is used twice in that passage, in the earth. Very interesting. So we're at a phase right now where it's pretty clear that the Christian world is dying, and we're seeing a major portion of that death being played out within the Catholic Church and the stepping down of Pope Benedict. This is going to be, it's a huge event. It's going to be one of the biggest events in the last 50 years. Trust me on this. And what's coming is a different type of belief system. And some people will be happy and thrilled because of this. One of the things that will come out of what's happening with the Pope is there will be a scandal. There will be a sex scandal with children. And this will further pollute the quote-unquote sanctity of faith and turn more people into cynics, and be glad that the Pope and be glad that the Church is becoming and antiquity a thing of the past. And what will happen as a result is in the vacuum of this, a new form of religion or a new form of spirituality will emerge. In fact, it's always been emerging. It's been emerging for the last 10 years. And this is really, for lack of a better term, the illuminist fashion statement that has been going on through and moving through music and film and TV, cinema. You all know the symbols, you know the fashion, you know the pop stars and the movie stars and the politicians that support it. This is what's being programmed to replace the traditions of Christianity, and the Catholic Church is the big one. It's the big one. It's got the most members in any faith out in the Christian order. So we have on one hand this illuminist, feel-good, false Aquarian belief system, and on another level, Christianity is also being replaced by Islam, by the way, because the numbers are enormous in Islam, absolutely enormous. And what's also interesting too is that during the Bush administration, if you look at what happened in terms of the demonization of Islam, it was big. It was really big, and a lot of that was based on, of course, 9/11 false flags, and all the propaganda that people were susceptible to during that time, mass traumatization, and of course, most Muslims, they don't speak very good English. Their skin tone is dark. It begins to ping certain people's latent racism. Now, if you've noticed what's happened since Obama has become president, that once we quote unquote killed Osama bin Laden, that the focus on Al-Qaeda and the Taliban has really gone away. We're not being given these kind of serial terrorists that pop up, every 2 or 3 weeks. That's just not happening. Now, it could be said that this would be a testament to the drone strikes and the drone technology that's been deployed in Afghanistan and Pakistan and other places, because what we're doing is we're rooting out the nests, the sleeper cells, the training centers inside of Afghanistan and Pakistan and other places, perhaps even Iraq. That could be one narrative, but perhaps there's a different narrative in that game is over. Those people, as public enemy number one, are done, especially because we have a president who is, by the way, a Muslim, Barack Obama. Barack is a Muslim name, Barack Hussein Obama. So now the emphasis has shifted. Now who are the new terrorists? Now who are the new public enemy number one? Now where is the battleground? Do you see where all this is going? So Islam is going to move from a religion that has been, I would say, to some extent persecuted over the last 12 years and vilified, and people had been targeted in Islam. But at the same time, it's also a religion and a faith that is really very clearly been supported by the UN through immigration and allowing to move to places like France and set up the south of France, to set up mosques in the south of France. But French are they're very anti-Muslim, the French. So it's been mandated that Europe take in, large numbers of Muslims from North Africa and the Middle East. And this is starting to happen here in this country as well. So we're seeing a shift in perception of Islam. It is not going to be the vilified religion that it has been over the past 12 years. Trust me on this. The scorn and vilification is going to shift to Christians now. And I was baptized. I don't go to church, but I can see these things happening. I can see them happening. So I think this is where we're headed. This is the future of religion. Christianity will be branded a faith of hate, a faith of separation. And there are a number of reasons, and I don't have enough time for the rest of the show to go into this. I'm looking at this specifically from a programming perspective. Now, if you're a Christian, you actually might really be angry or upset that your religion is being vilified and will continue to be vilified by extremely progressive, revolutionary and radical interests. But again, there's a reason for it. The reason is because they want to eliminate Christianity in general. They want to eliminate the principles of the life of Jesus. They want that to be gone, done, over. That vision of God is far too compassionate, far too personal, far too loving, right? And so they'll paint it in a very different perspective, in much more judgmental, hateful, and separate terms. And what will it be replaced with? It will be replaced with this syncretic, multiversal form of religion. I have long said that the new religion, the world religion, is Baha'i, the Baha'i faith. And we might be able to get into that later on, not today because I've only got 5 minutes. But I believe that the Baha'i faith has been crafted to be the religion that will replace Christianity as the one world religion. The reason why I believe that is because it has a very strong Muslim core, but then it also has the satellite network of belief systems that it also tends to incorporate, whether it's Buddhism or some, more pasteurized form of Christianity. It is the universal, multiversal religion. And the headquarters for Baha'i is Iran. That's where it came out of, by the way. So keep your eyes on Baha'i and keep your eyes on what happens in the days, weeks, and months to come as it relates to Christianity, the Catholic faith, and the tradition of the West through the life of Jesus, Sananda Emmanuel. It's going to be very, very interesting. And as we saw with the stepping down of Pope Benedict, there was some incredibly interesting phenomena as well as a result. The lightning bolt on St. Basilica, and of course the comets, which followed right in the wake of it. So we live in a time of prophecy. We live in a time of symbolic change, and some of that is real, and some of that is man-made, and some of it is being primed and prompted by the creators of the consensual reality, the agreement script, and some of that is actually coming out of a place of, well, real phenomena. And the challenging part is how to decide, right? How to decide what's real now, because if we have the bedrocks of our faith, right? You could always count on the Vatican. You could always count on the Pope. There's a new Pope. There's a new Pope. There's a new Pope, right? If you're a Catholic, you could always count on that. What happens when these institutions begin to crumble and fall? Where does the faith go? Where do people go in a faithless world? In a world where there's more chaos and terror in some ways than ever before. And the face of God is gone in the form of a man or in the form of, again, crumbling institutions. It's going to be interesting. And it's a time where I think we're all going to be tested in our own way as to what faith means. And that'll be a very personal experience for each and every one of us. All right, that's it. I am done. Going to go back into my Piscean miasma here around the Free Association World Headquarters. And I'll be back on Wednesday. I might try to get another psychic on. I had a request for a psychic for the Wednesday show. Seems like a good guy. He's local, so maybe I'll hook up with a local spiritual practitioner and see what that's about. And then Friday, I have a guest that I'm working on, and we'll see where that goes as well. I'll let you know more about that on Wednesday. All right, well, listen, thank you as always, for tuning in. I hope today's show was thought-provoking and got you to kind of step outside your box a little bit and perhaps raise more questions and give you more answers. And as far as faith goes, I would say that the best thing that you could do is use your head to discern what's real and your heart to stay open to what's possible. I'm Robert Phoenix. You've been listening to the Monday Mashup. Take care. I'll see you all on Wednesday.
We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu. perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words, I submit that these impressions are valid and significant. And I will even say this, such an impression is a clue that at some past time point, a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this, an alternative world branched off.